Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux here with a review for A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now this is one that I may eventually cover in my Why We Horror podcast, but as I did A Nightmare on Elm Street and I'm moving into doing A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 because I want to focus entirely on the Elm Street trilogy, I realize I haven't revisited this film in quite some time. So, in looking at A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, it's a kind of mixed bag that I like. Mixed bag in the sense that, as a sequel to A Nightmare on Elm Street, it kind of doesn't work all that well. It just breaks or does away with all of the dreamscape lore that Craven created in that original film. In fact, this film has very few nightmares. If anything, it's more of a possession movie. And Freddy is constantly possessing the main character. And Freddy has the darkness from the first movie, but it's weird. This film is kind of poorly shot. And this just kind of goes to show how good of a filmmaker Wes Craven was versus the filmmaker of this film. Because it has the same director of photography for both movies. Jacques Aitken did photography for the first two Nightmare films, yet this one lacks the visual language that first Nightmare on Elm Street had. The base premise of this is compelling. I like the idea of it's 5 years later, somebody else has bought that house, and they discover Nancy's diary, and it's through reading Nancy's diary that Freddy is able to return. The base premise there sounds fantastic. It's not really capitalized on that too well because the film focuses on other things. We'll get to that shortly because I do think that is the strength of the film. That being said, I want to highlight the performances in this. I think everybody in this film is really quite good. The acting is strong, especially from Mark Patton, who I think, for my money, gives a better performance than Heather Langenkamp did in that first Nightmare on Elm Street. She would grow to become a tremendous actress. But that first movie, she's good, but not amazing. I think he gives a genuinely great performance. And the lead girl that is opposite him, who looks vaguely like some kind of Meryl Streep or a Streep offspring, is also pretty good. But this film doesn't really work as a sequel to A Nightmare on Elm Street. It lacks the flavor, it lacks the visual punch. The kills are incredibly mundane. But what you get in turn is a movie that is incredibly important to the LGBTQA plus community. This is a film, and one of the few mainstream films of the 80s or even really 90s to basically be a kind of coming out story. And what you get with this is Freddy here is an allegory for the thing that he is hiding from everybody else, that's threatening to break free, and what will people think about him once that truth is known. He'll be ostracized, he'll be jailed, if you will, but he's in kind of his own personal hellscape prison anyway. And this is, I think, the only Nightmare film to have a male lead protagonist, besides, Freddy himself. But that's also kind of unusual in general for these kind of films. I guess you could make an argument for Tommy in, like, Friday the 13th, 4, 5, and 6, but this character actually has a pretty strong character independent of the surrounding lore. And it's really quite compelling when viewed from a LGBT lens. And I think its general importance should be highlighted. But because of its mixed bag energy, the lack of Freddy doing anything really inventive. However, there are some really neat visual effects. There's a moment where Freddy literally comes out of Mark Patton, and that scene, I'm still not entirely sure how they did, especially like his hands. You see the like his human hand, and then Freddy's knives pushing through that, and then his sweater bursting through the skin in his arm as he's revealing himself in his sort of coming out scene. Shy of that, it's pretty lackluster with its visual language, which is something that you think about when you think of Nightmare on Elm Street, is how inventive these films often look. This is easily the weak point, and when I first watched the entire franchise, I thought this was the weakest entry. Revisiting it now, I still think, as part of that original slate of films, it might be the weakest, but I don't know that I'll hold true to that. I will review the other films as we get through them in either my podcast or on here, because I do care to revisit that. I'm very curious. But this is a strange case of having a documentary come out about a movie that's better than the movie itself, a la Heart of Darkness to Apocalypse Now. There's a movie that came out in 2019 called Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. And it is a documentary about Mark Patton, his rise in Hollywood, how this film shaped him then, shapes him now, and a confrontation with the screenplay writer of Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Because that writer had made some pretty problematic statements and really psychologically toyed with and messed with Mark Patton, and placed a lot of the film's failings on him rather than taking any ownership of the writing, which he could have done. And it wasn't until the film later was embraced by the LBG community that the writer took ownership of what the movie is kind of about. And this documentary is phenomenal. It's currently streaming on Tubi. I highly recommend that you watch Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. It is one of the finest film documentaries I've seen. The subject matter is fantastic. You really, really get good insight into this man's life and the career trajectory he was going on, the way the fear-mongering and AIDS epidemic of the 80s came about and kind of crippled his career at the same time of this film's release, and how he is being an activist today. Exceptional documentary. Highly, highly recommend watching Scream Queen. But there you have it. I realized I didn't give a star rating. I'd give Nightmare on Elm Street 2 a 3 out of 4 stars. It's good, but it's kind of good in retrospect and good through one very specific lens. A lens for which you might have... sorry if you're hearing scratching. My turtle got loose and he's just roaming about. Anyway, it's a reading... There can be readings of this movie that might not hold up well today, but representation matters, representation then especially so. So I think that kind of trumps any kind of quality that maybe having a predatory gay man as your allegory isn't the greatest look, especially in the back half of the 80s where that was kind of commonplace. That being said, I like this movie. Let me know what you think of A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 in the comment area down below, and watch I'll have a link for it here somewhere, my podcast, deep diving into the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and stay tuned in about a month or so, October, we're going to be touching on A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors for my podcast. I look forward to that. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Peace.